week I am going to be talking about religion. Although to be honest, as much as even though we start with religion, the main goal is answering this question of what holds us together. Where do we find community? So we're starting with religion, but the main focus of this week is ending up at that place of social solidarity. Now, you'll see how we get there. If you are a sociologist who studies religion, there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's some great work being done in sociology of religion, and some of my favorite work in cultural sociology. And we do offer a course, I believe, every year in the fall. There's a social religion course. So if you're interested in taking that, that is an option. Now, you could look at, if you're a sociologist of religion, you could look at how meaning gets attached to different religious groups and the religious rights that they receive. There's a lot of work on politics and religion. So in the United States, we've seen the rise of Christian nationalism, which has really, in a sense, fueled the more conservative Republican movement. So we could see religion in politics. In Minnesota, there's something called the American Mosaic Project, which has tracked for many years which religious groups encounter the most trust and distrust. So asking questions like, through survey, who would you want your children to marry? Who would you want to live next to? You know, that type of stuff. And for many years, the group that's received the lowest amount of trust was atheists. So even though we don't consider someone who's atheist a religious person, right? They're actually someone who lacks religion. That's the group that receives the least amount of trust when you list all the different groups associated with religion. Others have used this concept of McDonaldization, which I'm going to lecture on, I believe, the last week of class to look at the growth of megachurches. So there's lots of different things that you could do. At a most basic level, and you'll see this in the textbook, there's going to be a classification of religious belief based on, do you believe in a God? Do you believe in multiple gods? Is your religion based on an ethical or moral system? Is it based on a belief in a spiritual world like animism? So there's lots of different approaches. One of the key things is this general move in society from religiosity and spiritual belief towards a more rational scientific orientation. But that's not a linear path, right? Again, going back to the United States, religion has a very powerful effect on our belief system in the United States, right? So it hasn't just been this simple move from being religious to being not religious. But there are specific patterns based on the region that you live. Now, the sociologist who's most famous for studying religion, probably the first one to do it, I'm going to go back to one of the founders of sociology. And in your textbook, you're going to learn a lot about different approaches to religion. But I just want to talk about what Durkheim gives us, Emil Durkheim. You don't need to remember his name, but I do want you to think through his ideas. So Durkheim was the first functionalist. Now, if you remember, I think the very first week I gave a lecture on the 3 dominant approaches in sociology. One of them was functionalism. What makes society function? What holds societies together? What creates cohesion? It's from this perspective he was interested in the role of religion. So for Durkheim, being a good functionalist, being the first functionalist, religion must exist. It must be this dominant institution in society because it fulfills some kind of human or social need. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist, right? This is kind of an evolutionary approach. If you see a bird with an incredibly long beak, you ask, why does the bird have such a long beak? It's ridiculously long, so it can't just be random or chance, right? I mean, it's random through mutations of DNA, but then it must have some value to continue to have that mutation. And then we learn, well, it's to get at nectar from a long flower. So what Durkheim is saying, if we see religion in every society, religion of some sort, but we have religions that some rely on the belief in a God, some don't rely on belief in a God. There's all these disagreements. Some of them believe in an afterlife. Some of them don't believe in an afterlife. Well, religion and religious experience must provide something, but he had to find something that was true in every example of a religion. And what he came up with was saying every religion relies on the distinction between the sacred and the profane. Now, what he means by this? I'll explain a few qualities and then it will start to make sense. Anything can be sacred, right? It varies by religion. Different things can be sacred in different religions. In one religion, you can't eat a certain meat. In another, you can eat a certain meat. In one religion, you can't touch a certain thing. In another religion, you can touch a certain thing, right? There can be divisions. So it's not that something is inherently sacred. But in that religion, when something is sacred, it is not profane. It is mutually exclusive. You are either sacred or you profane. You cannot be both at the same time. In that religion, right? A different religion would have a different listing of what's sacred and profane. Next thing, sacred means that it's special. It requires it requires special treatment. Profane is everyday. It's not necessarily better or worse than sacred, but it's just an ordinary thing that you can use in an ordinary way. These two things have hostile opposition, meaning you are not supposed to mingle them. It's repugnant. It's forbidden, right? If you treat the American flag as a sacred object of civil religion in a sense, if you follow the rules that go along with this flag being sacred, you're not supposed to use it in an ordinary manner, right? There's all these rules around the flag. You're not supposed to let it just drag on the ground. You're not supposed to let it drag behind your vehicle. You're not really supposed to drape it over your body. A soldier wouldn't do that. Now there's some, right? We can see it shift how different people have different ideas of the sacred. You technically shouldn't have it on your shoes or on your clothing. The flag is supposed to be something that's treated as different and doesn't mingle with the ordinary. If you have a religion where a meat has a certain sacred meaning, you don't have it with every meal, right? You don't eat it in an ordinary way. It has to be a special ritual that surrounds it. If you believe, if you're Catholic and you believe that the red wine that you have in Mass turns into the blood of Jesus, right? That is a sacred thing. You don't drink that to get drunk, right? If you're Catholic, even if you're looking for alcohol at night, you don't head down to your local church and go in the basement and drink a bunch of that red wine. That would be seen as sacrilege, right? That's not what you're supposed to do. Now, a key thing is sacred and profane is not the same as saying good and evil. Something sacred could be sacred in that it's good or it's evil. Something profane you could like more or less. Sacred is something special and different. Lots of examples. All of the different religious texts, those are sacred things, right? You have the Christian's Bible. What else did I put here? You have the Muslims' Quran. You have the Jewish Torah. Those are all sacred texts. For that religious group, there is something special about that object. If you were someone who was deeply devoted to certain religious belief and you came into my office and I was using one of the sacred text of your belief to prop up my table because it was wobbling, you would be offended, right? If I ripped out a page to write down a homework assignment on you, you would be offended. If I ripped out a page of a sociology book, you wouldn't care. If I used a sociology book to prop up my table, you wouldn't care. But because you are a member of that group that holds this object as sacred, it has special things around it. Now, again, this does not mean that something is good or bad or cute, right? That puppy you could think is cute, but it doesn't mean it's sacred. It's an ordinary thing, even if you like it a lot. You can make things that seem to be ordinary, right? You can make them. These type of things can become sacred. If you travel around Italy, you can go to different churches, and in that church, they will have a relic associated with a saint. And those relics are sacred because they're associated with that saint. We don't use it in an ordinary manner, right? So you can find a piece of clothing, not jeans, but you can find a piece of clothing that saint wore. You no longer treat them as ordinary. No one wears the jeans of the clothing of that saint. Instead, they're in a shrine and people line up outside the church just to go in and be close to that sacred thing so it can give you a little of that sacred power, right? You associate it with it, and then the sacredness, in a sense, it oozes off it, right? There's a power of being next to it. It takes you out of the ordinary and puts you into a different form of existence. There's this famous example. Now I'm trying to remember what it was. I can't remember. I think it's Ireland. And there's toenails. They're supposed to be toenails of a saint, right? And you go and you see the toenails of a saint. And this is this thing that's sacred. Now, imagine if at the end of the semester I said, whoever has the highest grade in the class, I'm going to give this incredible gift. And so someone finishes, gets the highest grade in the class, and I say, all right, stop by my office. You can get the gift. You stop by, and I have a jar full of my toenail clippings. You would be disgusted. You would think I've gone out of my mind, right? I'm not someone who's considered to have this link to a higher power. My toenails are not sacred. You do not treat them as special. You would be disgusted and throw them out. They're mundane and ordinary to you. Your favorite pair of blue jeans, not sacred, right? It's not about how nice the blue jeans are. It's about whether or not it's separate from the ordinary world. It represents something bigger. That's the other way to think about it. Now, we find sacred objects in other places, these objects that we imbue power to, that link to some sort of larger collective that we treat in a special way, right? Think about some examples. If you are a big fan of the New York Giants, this jersey, a Lawrence Taylor jersey, one of the greatest football players of all time, played for the New York Giants, arguably the greatest defensive football player of all time. If you have a jersey that is worn by Lawrence Taylor, you are not simply going to keep it in your closet. You'll probably have it framed to keep it protected. You're not just going to wear it every day. You're not going to wear it to class. You're not going to wear it to play football unless you have some sort of ritual around it. Maybe every Sunday when the Giants play, you put on your Lawrence Taylor jersey and you feel more connected to that team. It's sacred. You're not doing it in an ordinary manner. You would be so upset if you spilled something, even if it's possible to clean, if you spilled something on that jersey, right? It only comes out on the most special moment. Or maybe you're someone who's really into classic rock and you play guitar and you're obsessed with Jimi Hendrix, and a family member gives you a guitar pick that Jimi Hendrix used when he played. Or you go and see your favorite band live and the guitarist throws out that guitar pick and you catch it. Right now it's sacred. Even though it's just an ordinary guitar pick that you could buy at the local guitar store for 50 cents or 75 cents, that's sacred. It means something. You don't just use it. You don't just keep it in your pocket. It has this special power. It links to something bigger. It links to all the people who love Jimi Hendrix. It links to Jimi Hendrix himself, who becomes some sort of like a rock god, right? We call them rock gods. Or maybe you're a huge fan of Drake, right? You love Drake. You go to a show in Toronto when concerts are opened up. You're in the audience. You just played your favorite song. He's sweaty from performing. You're sweaty from listening to him. He throws his hat into the crowd and you catch it. You have this sweaty hat in your hand. That sweat is not disgusting in that moment. It is Drake's sweat. It is something that's more special and more powerful than before. That's different than if a classmate comes into class after football practice and throws their hat into the air. You're going to be disgusted by that sweat. It's different when it's Drake, right? These become sacred objects. Now, and you could think about what that iconography does, those material objects that connect us to a certain faith, right? They remind us of the group that we're part of. People who are religious carry around these objects, these icons, to remind themselves that they're part of a community, to remind themselves of their faith. Maybe when they start to lose faith, it can bring them back. It's a reminder that you're not alone, even though it's simply an object. It can transport you because it has that sacred power. And it has that sacred power because we believe in it. That's key for Durkheim. He's not trying to show whether our belief in religion is based on reality. He's not trying to prove that there is a God or there is not a God, right? He's trying to do something different. Sorry, that was my cell phone going off. He's not trying to test that. Instead, he's saying, let's understand what it does for society. That's what actually matters. What does it do? If we believe it, if it has effect, then it's real in that sense. So religion for Durkheim, it emerges and brings a sense of meaning and forces outside of the self, right? Religion reminds us that we have these bigger obligations to something beyond ourself, right? And then the other thing that it does is we can feel the actual power of being part of a group. He calls this a collective effervescence. I want you to know this term, collective effervescence. Collective effervescence. It's going to be part of in-class writing. It's also a really useful term to think about your own experiences in the world. Collective effervescence is the kind of, it was a kind of high or energy that you get from being part of an intense group setting, from feeling like you're part of a group. It separates you again from your everyday routine. It leads you to make that distinction between the normal and the special. So if you're caught up in this event where you feel like you're almost transported and you get this out-of-body feeling, that's collective effervescence. There's something carrying you along that you can't actually explain. There's tons of examples of this. Famous example would be this. Like, what's happening here, right? We see a bunch of people behind a barrier. We see a woman fainting. The police are carrying her away. You might wonder if it's some sort of, is there a political protest going on? Is there a riot happening? Like, what's occurring where there's so much intensity? Here's someone screaming and crying, and there's all these women watching, and the police are, again, carrying her away as she's weeping. Here's people banging at a door. I mean, it almost looks like a zombie movie with people trying to break through and attack. What's going on? This is the first time the Beatles are in the United States. It's a musical band that people are so excited about, so caught up that they're transported along by that energy, right? This woman's crying because the energy is so powerful. These are women trying to break down a door, which they would not do. They're trying to break through a police barrier because they're so caught up in that moment of feeling something bigger. If you've ever been to a political event where you feel like it's so powerful that you're chanting, you're screaming, like the emotions carrying you along, that's collective effervescence, right? And you can think about the real power that it has. Imagine someone going to a concert that they're really into, or a club or a rave, and you're really into it. If you're into electronic music, this could happen. People can go to a festival and listen to electronic music and dance for hours and hours and hours. We would not say someone who goes to electronic music festivals or goes to raves is the best athlete in the world. But think about how hard that is to dance for hours. Take that same person. I could challenge any of you. Just don't have any music on. Don't have anyone else in the room. Just try to dance for like 30 minutes. Do you know how exhausting that is? How difficult it is? But we are carried along by being part of a group. It's not simply the music. Put the music on and do it by yourself. It probably won't do it unless that music has the power to take you out of the ordinary and everyday. All right, so getting back to this functionalist question that Durkheim has, this is all about community. Religion and the sacred bring a sense of social solidarity. He had a profound respect for the important role that religion plays. It brings people together, right? This is a social unity. It strengthens our collective conscious because we have a shared experience. We share sacred objects. We share those energies. We share those highs. Those shared beliefs, ideas, ways of thinking, ways of knowing, how we describe religion, that's something really important. Now, Durkheim also angered the religious too, though. Even though he had a great respect for religion, he angered them because he didn't believe in the supernatural forces. He didn't actually care if they actually existed. He said these things represent the collective of society itself. People create religion as a way of making sense of the experience of being a social being, which includes the awareness that you have an obligation to something outside of you, and that you have responsibilities to certain rules that seem higher than who we are, that seems above us, that seems higher than us. So he both angered those who didn't believe in religion, and he angered the religious with this theory. But this is this core sociological idea. And I think it's really important right now, right? Thinking about one of the fundamental challenges of the coronavirus is our social separation. Where do we get that sense of collective belonging? He thinks that's essential to being human. If you don't have hobbies that bring you together, if you don't have religion that brings you together, if you don't have a party that brings you together, if you don't have interactions in the classroom that make you feel like you're part of something bigger, if you don't have pride in Brockport, if you don't have pride in being from Buffalo, if you don't have pride of being Catholic, if you don't have pride of being a member of a community, any of those things, that can be a challenge. That's why we seek these feelings out and why we struggle so much when we're isolated from each other. And there's examples all over the place. I used to have a reading in class about people who raise pigeons. And it was through raising pigeons and actually flying the pigeons and have them come back to us that they found this feeling of social solidarity, of collective effervescence, right? The pigeons were sacred. Now, if you're from New York City or any city and you think of pigeons, you don't think of something sacred. You think of something dirty and annoying. But if you're a group that raises pigeons and flies them and waits for them to come back after flying hundreds of miles, they become a sacred object. If you're someone who's incredibly patriotic, the flag is this sacred object. And this is one of the debates that's happened in sports, right? What is the appropriate action during the national anthem? What is the important action when a flag is being raised, right? The athletes will say, we are expressing our political belief. We are expressing a feeling of injustice in the United States, but we are paying respect to the flag, right? When Colin Kaepernick first started kneeling, he talked to a soldier. I can't remember if I think he was a Green Beret. He was a member of the Special Forces in some way. They came to this judgment. Other people still remain offended by this, right? This is a source of debate that continues to rage in the United States. But we could also think, when are people offended and when are they not offended? This is a picture of Josh Reddick after a huge game in the playoffs when the Houston Astros won. I think it was a Game 7 that was going to take him to the finals of the playoffs of Major League Baseball, and he celebrated winning that important playoff series by being sprayed with champagne, or actually this might have been beer. I'm trying to see what they're using. I think it's actually beer. So they're spraying him with beer. But look what he's wearing. He's wearing the American flag. No one complained about that. He didn't receive death threats for not being patriotic, right? So different understandings of what athletes can or cannot do around the flag. Why do we get angry, and when do we get angry? All right, I think I'll end there. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully you got something from this for the in-class writing. I'm going to ask you, all you have to do, it's going to be short. Think of some of your own examples, right? Have you ever encountered something that you would consider a sacred object? What is that sacred object? Why do you consider it sacred? How is it separate from the ordinary and everyday world? How do you treat it special? Do you have rituals around it? And then the next question I'm going to ask you, it's only 2 questions, is have you ever experienced that feeling of collective effervescence? Where? And then describe it. So only 2 questions for the in-class writing. Going to be an easy one. And that is that.